All right, welcome back. We're going to be talking to Josh Del Sol. He is the creator of a documentary called Take Back Your Power, which covers smart meters. He also puts out regular updates diving into the matters of 5G that are unfolding right now, and you can find all those updates on takebackyourpower.net. But in this discussion, we're going to be diving into a lot of kind of some of the recent stuff that's going on here, picking up from our conversation in the first segment. So, Josh, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, Joe, thanks. Good to be talking with you.
Awesome. Yeah. So, obviously 5G is a big thing, and I know you're right in the thick of this. You put out a lot of content on this and are kind of, really diving deep into a lot of the different matters. And one of the big things is obviously there's a big push, it seems a race now, if you want to call it that, between China, perceivably, and the US, pushing to see who can put out the most 5G infrastructure the quickest. Can you touch on that a little bit and kind of some of what's going on there?
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a frenzy has taken over, especially in the States and North America, you could say, with the competing with China and who could be the quickest. And the media, of course, the corporate media is playing this up, and they're I think on April 3rd, Verizon went live with 5G in parts of Minneapolis and Chicago. So those are the first two live deployments of 5G that are really being promoted as the launch of 5G in this country. And so there was even within the media there was the competition between who put it out first. Was it China? Was it Verizon? Was it Korea? It's kind of this. It's become this egoic kind of competition, this meta ego competition, rather than looking at basic fundamental factors like what is this opening the door to? Is this harmful to biological life? What does it mean for our way of life? And what is the connection to artificial intelligence and how that all could potentially play out going forward? So it's really kind of a strange situation where in other parts of the world there is a very considerable pushback, and we can talk about that a little bit. But especially in the United States and of course, Canada, it's being blindly propelled forward just through aspects of those who have power and money wanting more power and money and control. And we can talk about maybe the consciousness of that is sort of behind that, if you like, and if your audience would find that interested. But it's a really challenging situation to face right now, and we really need to come back to the facts of what is 5G, how does it work, and what does it mean for humanity.
Absolutely, and it's interesting because very few, at least from what I'm seeing, of those types of conversations are having, I guess we'll say regularly, within the mainstream media. I mean, there is some level of it where, there's been questions of, hey, there's a little bit of pushback here, there's a little bit of pushback there, but there's not a lot of question around safety and what testing has really been done. It's not a big part of the mainstream conversation. It's really just about business. It's about economy. It's about, bringing it forward, the race between them and China. I mean, Trump having his statements, about, hey, America needs to be the first to do this. And, that just kind of brings us to this question of obviously there's a lack of safety. And when we're looking at, one thing I think a lot of people don't realize is that we already know for sure that there are damages that come from EMF radiation. Now, this is something a lot worse. Can you touch on a little bit of that and how, just kind of bring people up to speed on how much a significantly worse that 5G is from the regular radiation that we get from, say, cell phones or Wi-Fi signal and so forth?
Sure. Well, to put it in context, there's been more than 10,000 studies on electromagnetic radiation and its biological effects. But the vast majority of those show that there is a biological effect. The industry studies, the majority of the industry-funded studies are, organized and performed in a manner to not show a negative biological effect. So there's very clearly, if you just by looking objectively at the science, you can see that industry involvement in running their own research has created a situation where they have, for as long as possible, from their perspective, try to create this perception in the people's mind of, oh, we need to do more studies. We don't need to do more studies because there are thousands that show harm.
Yeah.
And Senator Blumenthal in the States has been pushing the industry to confirm, have you done studies? And if not, why? And when are you going to do the studies? And it was, as some of your readers may be aware, in February, it was confirmed, basically industry admitted that, I think it was February, don't quote me on that, it might have been early March, but industry reps admitted that they aren't doing any studies on the safety of 5G and that they don't plan to spend any money to do studies on the safety of 5G. Now let that sink in for a moment in light of the fact that of thousands of other studies showing that that type of radiation causes harm. Everything from cancer to sterility. And we can talk about that because there's been a lot of talk about this as a potential, soft control of population, of global population reduction with sterility. DNA damage, double-strand DNA damage, neurological problems. There's been a huge, as anybody who's kind of been following health trends knows, in the past generation, there's been a huge increase in more than 30, germless chronic conditions and diseases. So we're trying to understand, the science is indicating that electromagnetic frequencies and radiation is playing a significant part in that puzzle. So we need to actually get back to the science and look at the harm. And when we look at the context, okay, so industry, not only have they never done a study that shows that 5G is safe. They've never done any study, actually, on 5G and millimeter wave frequencies, according to their reps. But they also own and control and have totally dominated agencies, federal agencies like the Federal Communications Commission in the States. So Harvard University, their ethics department has released a couple of years ago a report basically calling this out. And they identified the FCC as the most corrupted, most dominated by industry of any agency, more than the FDA, more than other agencies. And this is the same situation in Canada with Health Canada, and this is the same situation with ICNIRP in Europe and around the world, is that there is science that indicates a considerable level of harm, and talked about this in the documentary Take Back Your Power. All of that, a lot of that science is kind of exposed and brought out into the open. But there's just so much money to be made, Joe, with 5G and AI and the Internet of Things, and the Internet of everything. And many people would say there's just so much control of humanity to be had by those people that are behind all this. But when we focus in on 5G, there's three essentially different bands of frequencies we're looking at. So it's not all millimeter wave radiation, what's called millimeter wave, which is 24 gigahertz and higher. 5G is both, fairly low microwave frequency range from 6 to 900 megahertz, and there's a middle range between, I think, 2 to 5 gigahertz, and then there's the millimeter wave. So it's kind of a mishmash or combination because these super high gigahertz millimeter wave frequencies do not penetrate through, concrete walls, for example, as well as the low frequencies. The industry has had to revise their plans of 5G deployment, as far as I can tell, and are including a mishmash of different frequencies. Now, on the millimeter wave frequency side, the studies, there are studies that have been done that do show clearly a negative biological effect. So, and some of these effects are altering the microbiome in our body, in our bodies, for example. So this is very serious when you see how we are connected, how important our microbiome is to us, and not only humans, Joe, but all life. So there are hundreds of doctors that are trying to get the word out, and you guys have done an excellent job reporting on that. But basically, the science is essentially done, and so we have a situation here in the States where Trump just a couple days ago announced a huge push for 5G, 6G, 7G, whatever G, and he's just all in. You know, he's all in. And so that, to me, is really, really, the final nail in the coffin of this whole QAnon thing, right?
Yeah.
Trust the program. Trust the, what is it? Trust the what?
Trust the plan, as
trust
it often
the plan.
is. Yeah.
Right, trust the plan. And I kind of got into that at the start, and he did some things, and when he first got into office, that were encouraging. With the whole consideration, he was calling out the pharmaceutical industry for harmful, potential harm in vaccines, and we think this guy is going to follow through on his word. But meanwhile, I'm really wondering now whether the whole thing was a planned bait and switch from the very start, and the whole agenda of the elitists has been to get 5G through. So they're willing to have Trump, perhaps, this is my, one perspective on it, but perhaps the elitists are willing to have Trump as a, he's allowed to challenge the system and play the part of, cleaning up the swamp to a certain level, and we keep hearing about these mass arrests, Clinton's going to be in jail and all these mass arrests are going to happen, and, just wait, just trust the plan. But meanwhile, he's pushing this 5G program ahead in a way that it's pretty shocking, so there's, I'll just say one more thing about that. I know I'm kind of on a rant here right now, but when anybody is telling you that you don't have to do anything,
right,
that you just need to trust a plan, that it's not about your participation, that should be a huge red flag. Yeah. That's exactly what QAnon has been telling people from the very start.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because it's like we've had that conversation so many times of like it was what inspired the first segment of this particular episode just before we jumped on the call here, was just the idea of here Trump is pushing for this, and now a lot of people are asking the question, just as you had, like, hey, why would Trump be pushing for 5G? And it leads to analyzing a few of the Q drops and sort of churning out this idea that, well, actually, it's the U.S. has found a safe way to release 5G, and that's why it's okay, because it's a safe version of it. It's kind of like the evolving wisdom. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, hold on a second. I've not seen any evidence of this. All the research I've done on the studies and everything that's out there with 5G and the different frequency bands and the different frequency ranges, I mean, this doesn't seem good. This doesn't seem like there's nothing here to promote that at all. In that statement, do you see anything to suggest that the U.S. or an alliance or whatever you want to call it has found a way to deploy this technology in a way that is safe from everything that you've seen?
I don't see that that's a truth-based statement. I think that's another convenient way to keep as many people as possible roped into trusting the plan.
Yeah.
And I hope, let me just say this, I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I really hope I'm wrong. Yeah. I really hope that I'm going to be surprised, and it's going to be some, sweeping wave of justice that's happening behind the scenes, and it's going to bubble up into mass transformation of consciousness and humanity, and it's all going to happen because there's some white hats behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Maybe I actually shouldn't hope for that anymore. Maybe it's just time to cut the cord to that hope. But honestly, I hope that I'm wrong. But to answer your question, there's no safe way to do 5G unless there's no electromagnetic frequencies.
Yes.
Because you can't have an Internet of Things without, in the models that they built out, without having microwave and millimeter wave radiation, period.
Yeah.
So unless there's some sort of quantum, technology or a new type of communication that is not any, no longer harmful to all biological life, then this is simply, in my view, just a way to have people not get involved in the 5G conversations that are happening. And last thing I'll say on that is that I stated earlier that there's a lot of pushback worldwide, but not in the States. Mm-hmm. That was, I guess, not exactly accurate or fair statement because there is a lot of pushback in the States and in Canada. It's just that we haven't had, like, for example, Russia, as a nation on March 28th, refused to transfer frequencies for 5G, which effectively delays any 5G rollout there for several years, right? That's big. That's a nationwide, development there. And in Brussels, they're halting it as of March 31, at least temporarily, until they can prove that it's safe. Right. And in Germany, Germany is actually interesting because there's a law there, I believe, that a minimum of 50,000 people have to sign a petition, and then the government actually has to debate it. They have to look at it. So as of April 4th, even the telecom website reported on that. And it's interesting, a lot of these telecom websites, these wireless websites are coming around, and they're starting to see, whoa, there's like legitimacy to these health issues, right? And they're starting to see the corruption in their own industry, that their own industry has basically, is allowing this harm. Netherlands, same thing. Insists that research must be carried out before any approval of a 5G network. That was just on April 4th. So, but in the States, there are at least 21 local governments now that have passed some sort of legislation to basically say either, 5G is there's a moratorium and it's not allowed the terrestrial small cell deployments, or there's tremendous restrictions on where these small cells can be deployed, these small wireless cells or small cell towers. So, for example, a lot of these cities, Joe, are actually passing laws to say not within 1,500 feet or a certain distance of residential areas or schools. And they're using their right to charge what are called recertification fees. So to charge the wireless providers to make it unprofitable for them to roll out their, deploy their infrastructure in these cities. So cities have this right. And there's some other developments, too, I can highlight. I don't know how much time we have or how deeply you want to get into it, but I just wanted to offer that additional perspective because there are so many people that are waking up to 5G right now, and they are getting involved. And the reason why these cities, even in the States, are passing these acts are because people are watching like videos, and they're watching, collective evolution posts, and they're watching Sasha Stone's documentary. They're on our list on TakeBackYourPower.net, and then they're bringing that information to their local governments, their local elected officials, which the California Supreme Court just 11 days ago upheld a verdict from 2011, basically saying that the local governments have way more power than they thought they had. There's been a misunderstanding of this 1996 Telecommunications Act, which seemed to give carte blanche to the wireless industry, that the local government cannot, refuse installation of cell towers without, on the basis of health. But that has been, it seems to be a more correct understanding is coming, even by way of California Supreme Court, surprisingly enough, reaffirming the power of local governments. So it's a really interesting conversation, and it's that shows that it's a recognition of the shift in power back from centralized, corporate interests back to the people, and it's a very encouraging sign. So there's so much going on right now, and I've kind of highlighted a few aspects here, but I just would encourage everyone to do your own research and to get involved in this, because this could be, because it relates to human autonomy. If you go down this path with 5G and AI and the Internet of Things, the Internet of People, where does that leave humanity? Whereas if we are able to come together and get organized and communicate effectively and bridge effectively including to elected officials who have legal responsibilities and liabilities and have been entrusted with our own safety, if we're able to bridge to them and communicate to them at this time, then we could, co-create a different human future for our shared reality.
Absolutely, and going back to it, the activeness, and this was, even some of the stuff I brought up in the first segment was just this idea of, if we're becoming complacent, if we're starting to sort of sit back and just accept what's happening, and not, to be fair, not all in the Q community, if you want to look at that. I mean, I've looked at a lot of this stuff as well, and it's not all people are operating that way. Some are just taking the information as it is. It's information, and they kind of unpack that in their own world however they will. But others are seeing it as, oh, okay, yeah, it's just like trust the plan, no big deal. And I've always been saying, like, don't just trust the plan. Like, you can be open to the plan and all that sort of stuff, but there's more to it. And the bigger sort of discussion is it's like, yeah, maybe Q and maybe Trump and maybe these people are working towards certain changes within the deep state regime and all that sort of stuff. But is it necessarily going to be the world that we all want? Or is it still a world based in business? Is it still a world based in taking advantage of technological advancements that are going to make people tons and tons of money, that are going to make politicians and business owners look incredible and prop up their egos in different ways, right? And this is the thing, is it's less about the good guys versus the bad guys and more about, what's the human condition. And that's where this last part leads to, that I'd love to kind of touch on. And it's from this article on your site, 5G, The Big Picture, written by Jeremy Nadler, who's a PhD, and there's this graph here on the page that I thought was very interesting that kind of shows how we've evolved from the various different technological advancements, from power lines to military comms, long wave radio, all the way up until we start getting into some Wi-Fi and now 5G and so forth, and we go from very, very low frequency hertz technologies all the way up into now the gigahertz, and we're seeing this evolution, and there's this suggestion that as we continue to evolve the technological side from a frequency perspective, it increased the disconnection that humanity has with nature and with their self-center, i.e. their consciousness within themselves. Can you touch on that a little bit and what your takeaway from that is?
It's so true. That's such a good article. It was originally published in the New View, and Jeremy is a philosopher, an author, and a mystic. He's a real dot connector. So, if you have a half an hour, I would definitely encourage you to, if you're listening to this, to take the time to read that, because it helps us understand where this is all going and how it connects to consciousness and identity and basically reality. So, my understanding, Joe, and it's part research and it's part opinion, but we have to be connected to the natural world. We have to be connected to nature. There's certain frequencies, like the Schumann resonance, for example, and the different frequencies from the Earth that that our consciousness is designed to operate within. There's certain cycles, like the circadian rhythm of when we sleep and when we rise, that we are designed to do best within. The further we get from and the sunlight, of course, the sun gives life along with water and along with the earth. The further we get away from these natural frequencies and sources of energy, the more we get tuned into artificial energy and frequencies, and moving away from our circadian rhythm, we just basically get sicker as a species, and we get more disconnected from the real. And the ultimate expression of the real, I think, is that divine spark, that divine source that we have within each of us, in my view. And that it's so easier. I find it personally so much easier when I'm getting in nature, away from anything artificial, away from EMFs, and just around the forest. And for at least a couple times a week, I find I have more energy, I sleep better, I have better dreams, meditations are deeper, and life just has a richer quality. So, the unspoken, maybe we could speak it now, that the concern with 5G, one of them is that as we see these increases in frequencies are occurring, in that graph that you mentioned, going higher and higher frequency, right? And as we see the increase in power density, or the increase in the amount of radiation, is exposure that we are subject to, that is it's leading us in a further and further disconnected state. And I don't do it justice. Jeremy really writes about it beautifully in that article. But I think there is something to this approaching the frequency of thought, approaching the frequency of consciousness in a way that is not, let's say, intended by our infinite creator or source or the self-intelligent, the self-organizing principle, however you want to define that. To do so, to try to escape the human condition through technology and through higher and higher frequency, like artificial frequencies, and it's almost like there's something happening with regards to consciousness. There's actual awakening that's happening, and there is a self-organizing field. There is an infinite creator, and the way that we can access that is through our own being inside of our own selves, because this is a holographic fractal reality. And so something authentic that's happening at this time. And when we see what's happening in this collective, construct, this global ego, it's almost like a cheap imitation of that. Does that make sense?
Yep. Absolutely.
And then that cheap imitation, it's so seductive, right? Our ego loves it. It's like we get, these dings and clicks and the sensation of having the power of this computer in our hand, and we can interact with it with our physical body, and our electrons from our protons, whatever, from our fingers are interacting with this screen and this device and these chips at a very subtle level. And it's seductive. It's based upon, a real deep understanding of the human psyche and what creates addiction. Even I saw a quote from one of the original Facebook founders the other day, and he was saying that he's horrified to think of what Facebook is actually like doing to kids now.
Yeah.
It's like, but yet, we're still using it. I'm still using it. I'm posting. I don't post a lot of personal things, but I share information on it. But it's just this call that we have right now. I think one of the roots of this call and this conscious ask to us is to really be mindful and really consider deeply our relationship with technology and how that relates to both ourselves and an individual and the bigger picture, and then get really aligned with what we consider to be the most sacred, and just to choose from that place, because it's when we choose from that place, that's when we can have an effect in the world, rather than to try to push around matter with matter only.
Yeah. Well said. And a lot of people don't even realize there's 20,000 satellites that are set to be put up in just the coming few years here, above Earth, that are going to help sort of fill in a lot of the gaps in this 5G infrastructure for a lot more rural areas and areas around mountains, lakes, rivers, and so forth. Because obviously they're not going to be putting as much on the ground infrastructure, which requires obviously close proximity. And in essence, that is going back to what you were saying. That's like going to be creating a night and day radiation, if you want to call it, that's planetary wide. And so for those who are feeling sort of helpless in a sense, take some of what Josh has said in terms of the victories that have happened around the world that are slowing down this process, that are putting control back in the power of the municipalities and the local governments. And if we can make this sort of not profitable for the businesses that are doing it, I mean, it's either they're going to have to go full fascist and just force it in there, or it's just not going to happen, and they're going to have to start to pull out. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting strategy there to sort of get involved. But if people want to learn a little bit more about how to actually take the action, like very specific things they can do, what would you suggest that they do?
I would suggest 3 websites. The first is if you want to subscribe and follow my work and our research, and we have a new project that's in development right now, you can do so at takebackyourpower.net.
Mm-hmm.
And there's I offer a free 12-page, or is it more now? I think it's a bit longer, but it's basically 5 quick ways to reduce your EMF exposure and boost your vitality. So that's a free PDF, and that'll get you subscribed to our list, where we can start having these conversations with updates and a forthcoming community and forthcoming specific actions that you can take. So I'd encourage you if you're listening to this and interested to do that. The second is there's two websites that are really good for grassroots. One is Environmental Health Trust, so that's ehtrust.org. I think it's a .org. Yes, .org. And so they have, if you click on the 5G page there, I think there's just so much information. It's basically all in one page. I'm just on their site right now looking for that specific page, but you can find it. And the third is AmericansForResponsibleTech.org. So what this organization is doing, and they're networking with a lot of different organizations, especially in the United States, that are fighting back. There on May 15th, there is a day of action that Americans for Responsible Technology is organizing. You can go on their website, AmericansForResponsibleTech.org, and click on Day of Action, and right there on that one page is basically everything you need to participate and organize and get a local group going, and they are they're available to support as well. But I think there's so many different websites, and on some of our articles on TakeBackYourPower.net, there's like 20 or 30 different websites, everything from the science on millimeter wave and microwave radiation to dozens of grassroots organizations. And I'd encourage people to really get engaged in this in a conscious way, and it's going to be such an opportunity to come together and to create something new. And I don't believe that it's a done deal for these 20,000 satellites to go up. I think to launch that many satellites, it's going to take some time, and over the course of that time, you're going to have more and more awareness spread about this. Like even in the past year, Joe, it's really you have for the documentaries that are out there now. Some of these videos on 5G are getting 2.5 million views.
Yeah.
RT did a video that I think got 1.5 million views. So this is a really good opportunity to really get aligned, I think, as an individual and with your own core values, and as a human species, I would say.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, that's it. That's all. I mean, thanks again for coming on here, Josh, and talking about this issue, which I think is important. Obviously people, it's an opportunity to get involved, and I appreciate your work and everything you're doing at Take Back Your Power.
Thanks, Joe. Great to chat with you as always.
All right, well, that's all for this segment. Coming up, we're going to be talking about the latest breaking news around Assange and what's going on with his arrest there. So be sure to check us back in, and we'll talk about Assange and what's going on there.